Hello, I'm Ellen Vince, coming today from Wheaton, Illinois, in the U.S. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Leigh-on-Sea in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now.
In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's August 16th, 2024.
Yeah, we're on a Friday this week for a change. Makes a difference sometimes. So this week, we're taking another key area for focus relating to this quarter's global healing response theme, the element of fire. And with this in mind, we turn our attention to a topic that has grabbed the news headlines in many countries in recent years, and one, too, that has profound consequences for many, the increasing and terrifying risk of wildfires. A wildfire is an unplanned, unwanted fire that burns in a natural area, such as a forest or grassland. They may be caused by human activity or by natural phenomena such as lightning, and can occur at any time and, indeed, virtually anywhere. Wildfires often have an unusually large impact on people and the environment. They may often exceed temperatures of, this is incredible, 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1,000 degrees Celsius, equivalent to 1/5 the temperature of the surface of the sun. Such intensity of heat can melt almost any building material within the proximity of the fire, whether or not the material is actually touched by the fire, which I think quite often we forget, isn't it? Yeah, this is not just if you're right on the course of the flames and the smoke that it can be damaging. And apart from the damage to property, forest and farmland, and of course the loss of human, plant and animal life, wildfire smoke poses a severe risk to both human health and the environment, containing a toxic mixture of hazardous air pollutants such as particulate matter, which is often abbreviated to PM, and lead. PM is especially linked to the premature deaths in the general population and is known to cause and exacerbate a variety of diseases affecting the lungs, heart, kidney, and more, as well as hastening cognitive impairment and memory loss. Actually, when I was looking at this, it's really quite incredible, the list of known conditions affected by this pollutant. Globally, wildfires are increasing in frequency, severity, and duration, with fire seasons starting earlier and ending later. Climate change has brought warmer temperatures and drier conditions. A 2022 report by the American Association for the Advancement of Science found that since 2002, 20 years ago, fire frequency doubled on the US west and east coasts and quadrupled in the Great Plains.
And that's just the U.S.
Yeah, that's just the US.
Yeah. So how is the world being affected by wildfires this year? So far, this year, we've seen a significant wildfire activity across various regions globally. As of last week in North America alone, nearly 4.75 million acres had been burned. The New York Times reported that fire activity for 2024 has already been above average for the past decade at the start of this month. California alone has seen over 4,260 wildfires, burning nearly 277,000 acres. 2.3 million acres have burned across Mexico, exacerbated by dry conditions and high temperatures due to the El Niño phenomenon. And in tropical South America, particularly in the Amazon, exceptional drought conditions have led to increased wildfire activity. with some areas experiencing the highest fire emissions in the last 22 years. According to data collected by the European Union-supported weather forecasting system, CAMS. As we record, a major wildfire has been burning across Crete since August 7th, burning an area of approximately 750 hectares and causing population evacuation and major damage. According to the JRC European Forest Fire Information System, the fire danger forecast remains very high to very extreme across most of the island. In late July, Oregon in the U.S. witnessed one of the worst fires in the country, spreading over nearly 270,000 acres and leaving a trail of smoky, unhealthy air conditions, while Coloradans faced evacuation orders for a blaze on the state's Front Range, which killed one person. Conversely, the upper ASEAN region of Southeast Asia has had below average fire emissions in the first part of the year. There were, however, exceptional temperatures recorded in Central Asia. Nepalese government data reports more than 4,500 wildfires occurred this year across the country, which is nearly double compared to last year. These numbers are sobering.
They are incredible, isn't it? I mean, I was particularly struck by that one about the quadrupling of the number of wildfires in the Great Plains in just 20 years. That's extraordinary. I know this week as well, in north of Greece, those who are in our Facebook group will know earlier in the week we were holding an attention around wildfires that had broken out in a couple of communities, or close to a couple of communities, just very near Athens. So they seem to be under control now. It's happening more and more and with greater intensity. So what regions of the world are most vulnerable to wildfires? There are several regions around the world that are particularly vulnerable, including countries such as Greece in the Mediterranean region, also including Spain, Portugal, Italy, and southern France, and especially during these hot, dry summer months when high temperatures and low humidity create ideal conditions for fires. Also highly vulnerable, as I'm sure many of us know, are the Western United States, that whole western seaboard, California, Oregon, and Washington. How could I forget Washington? And of course, reaching into the southern regions of Canada as well, particularly in British Columbia and Alberta, which have extensive forested areas, prolonged dry seasons between spring and the fall, and frequent strong winds. Urban expansion into some of these wildland areas has increased the fire risk by introducing more ignition sources. Bushfires during the hot summer months are also common in southeastern Australia. We know there were some terrible wildfires there a few years ago, and that includes in states like New South Wales and Victoria, where much of the natural vegetation is also highly flammable. I was really blessed to pay a visit there to relatives down in Victoria last month, in fact. They lived in what's called they live in what's called the Bellarine Peninsula, not too far from Melbourne. It's very, very close to the ocean, right, the southern part of Australia. And I was amazed how much, I guess it was eucalyptus, but very, very dry, what looked to me dead wood around. It was really quite astonishing on what you would imagine would be a fairly fertile and, moist coastal plain. Other vulnerable areas include deforested areas in the Amazon rainforest, Chile, and also the Western Cape of South Africa. The distinction between the seasons in many of these regions is also being blurred by climate change. Dry conditions can also be felt during the winter months. We find that in the UK now, January can be what traditionally would have been summer temperatures sometimes. What is more, a traditional understanding that cooler temperatures and higher humidity at night help slow the growth of wildfires has recently been shown not to hold. In fact, researchers have found that at least in extreme cases, there is no difference between overnight burn events and daytime burning. The long-range forecasts for temperature by the UK Met Office, in this case, for the remainder of this year suggest that 2024 will likely be another record-breaking year in terms of global temperatures, potentially exceeding the warmth of last year. This is partly attributed to the current El Niño event, which is boosting temperatures in the tropical Pacific.
Doesn't sound so good.
No.
I would really like to mention some news that I received from an organization that I support, Women for Women International, that there was a devastating market fire in south of Sudan. And this is an organization that supports women starting their businesses, and giving them startup money, and they can support their families and send their children to school and really change things for their community. And this is just devastating for them. There was even a story of a woman who wanted to throw herself on the fire because she realized without this, she wouldn't be able to send her children to school or provide food. So just another incident of the devastation of fire.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? All of their goods being taken, the food, which, as we mentioned last time, is in such desperately short supply as well. Their whole livelihoods, really. An absolute tragic story. Very.
And it wasn't just a place of business. It was a place of community where they gathered and shared news and stuff. So it's not just the loss of business. It's their loss of a place to be together. So hopefully they can rebuild and
let's really hold them for that.
We can support that,
coming
rebuilding.
Through. Finding ways that we from the outside can help as well. As we mentioned last time, that's not quite as straightforward as sometimes it is, given the lack of access for a lot of the aid agencies and so on to get into South Sudan and
right.
Yeah.
Right. So what causes wildfires? The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency notes two main causes of wildfires. Those that naturally occur, most frequently being caused by lightning, but also being triggered by volcanic, meteor, and coal seam fires. And human-caused wildfires, either being accidental, intentional, or arson, or resulting from an act of negligence. The U.S. Western Fire Chiefs Association says that nearly 90% of all wildfires are caused by human activities, such as discarded cigarettes, leaving campfires unattended, and equipment malfunction. However, climate change is playing a major role in the spread and intensity of wildfires. Warmer and drier conditions emerged during the 1990s, partly resulting from natural cycles, but exacerbated by human activities. Climatic conditions also affect the vigor of trees and plants, which increase the level of standing and fallen deadwood and litter, as you talked about, Clive. According to a UK climate risk analysis, the risk of wildfire could double in a 2 degrees Celsius global temperature increase scenario and quadruple in a 4 degrees Celsius scenario. Michael Pavlonis, a physical scientist at the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administrations, that's NOAA, says that land management practices also need to be factored in to the fire risk, noting that a century of fire suppression has left forests overgrown and combustible, at least in the U.S.
It's interesting, isn't it? These many different factors. But that analysis of what happens if we have 2 degrees Celsius global temperature increase, doubling the risk of wildfire, it really just brings home how much climate change is having an influence. And we're all most of us are feeling that, aren't we? We have been for some time now. So what are the typical impacts of wildfires? Wildfires can obviously have devastating consequences for people, property, industry, infrastructure, and the environment. Their economic impacts include the loss of tree stock and revenue, including for so-called downstream industries such as wood processing, tourism, and recreation, and disruption to transport and power infrastructure, affecting both homes and businesses. A new report by the US Congress Joint Economic Committee found that climate-exacerbated wildfires cost the United States between $394 and $893 billion per year in economic costs and damages. The new estimate takes account of related costs like property damage and diminished real estate value, direct deaths and injuries, health impacts from wildfire smoke, income loss, watershed pollution, among a range of other factors. It's a very long list of the implications there. Now, for the environment, wildfires result in habitat and species loss, of course, carbon loss, increased pollution, and smoke. None of those are good. Mm-hmm. Across the US, the amount of land involved in wildfires that suffered severe damage between 1981 and 2021 rose from 5% to 22%. Wildfires are also a major source of air pollution around the world, as we mentioned, being primary sources of PM, this particulate matter, carbon dioxide, and methane, among other pollutants. Wildfire smoke can impact air quality in areas that are not only close to the fire, but regionally, owing to the long-range transport and transformation of the emissions. These particles obviously carry over potentially thousands of miles in the higher atmosphere.
We experience that in the U.S. when there's a wildfire. I'm in the Midwest, and there are times that we're affected by that. And with these people with asthma, and, it can be really debilitating.
Yes, my goodness. Social consequences, so as you mentioned, people live with asthma and so on, include health threats to those on the front line, as it were, the forestry workers, tourists, and local communities, as well as closures or suspension of community shopping centres, schools, and hospitals, all with an economic impact as well. Mm-hmm. Frequent fires threaten emergency services in urban areas as fire departments' attention, their resources, their human power is often diverted to fighting them. Zach Tolby, director and lead scientist at NOAA's Fire Weather Testbed, said that living with wildfires is nerve-wracking, often keeping people from being outside nearly all summer in the worst affected areas. He remarked, once you have wildfires, there's a lot of PTSD from the effects of being around them. And there must be other medical effects as well, just not getting fresh air and being able to go out. There are often many unseen consequences too. For example, fires burning undergrowth along valleys can damage bridges by burning underneath them, resulting in the structural integrity of the bridges becoming unsafe. Smoke can impact power lines by degrading transmission and threatening arcing along the lines. And smoke also degrades air filters inside buildings and homes, with the resulting health consequences. And a lot more besides we've not mentioned there, but just to show that this long list of consequences, as we're saying, is not just right on top of, in close proximity to where the fires are occurring either.
Things I hadn't even thought about that you don't connect the dots to.
Exactly.
Unfortunately. So what measures are being taken to reduce the frequency of wildfires? Addressing the increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires requires a multifaceted approach that combines prevention, technological innovation, policy measures, and community engagement. Strategies being implemented globally include attempts at prevention and risk mitigation, including removing dead trees and other combustible materials from forests to reduce the amount of fuel available for fires, and implementing controlled burns to manage underbrush and reduce the risk of larger uncontrolled wildfires, educating the public on safe practices, such as properly extinguishing campfires and barbecues, and disposing of cigarettes safely, or maybe not using cigarettes. And promoting sustainable forest management practices to enhance the resilience of ecosystems to fires. Technological innovations are also being explored, including using remote sensing and satellite imagery to detect and monitor wildfires in real time, alongside using drones equipped with infrared cameras to identify fire spread and provide situational awareness to firefighting teams. AI is also being deployed to good effect. For example, NOAA's next generation fire system uses an AI model to identify fires from satellites. International cooperation on fire prevention and response is also being stepped up. For example, in May this year, the EU put together 556 firefighters from 12 countries and a fleet of firefighting aircraft to be strategically pre-positioned across key locations across the continent, ready to support local fire brigades when the scale of a wildfire overwhelms the response capabilities of a country. That's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Taking preventive action or anticipatory action. And it's quite good, I think, to see that AI, this is an example where AI and indeed drones are being used to good effect. You can send a drone, presumably, in over a wildfire, that's assuming it has the capacity to withstand the heat, to enable, the fire forces to see what's actually happening on the ground, and to be able to plan in situations where it would just be impossible to send human power. So where might we focus our prayers and intentions? There seem to be a lot of areas where we might home in with our intentions and prayers, and these are likely to be needed on an ongoing basis, given the fact that this is an increasing problem. Among particular topics that struck us as needing our attention are wisdom, really, for all of those, all agencies, policymakers, advisors, researchers, all involved in fire mitigation and response, to know how most effectively and where to focus and coordinate their resources and efforts. And also wisdom for all involved in the education and supporting communities affected by wildfires. So that may involve rehoming, but also returning potentially affected communities. And I know that some people never go back, particularly if your town, your community has been burnt to the ground. Where can you go, even if before houses are rebuilt? Many people will move on to a different area. I often think when we and I think this is true of all of the elements that are the themes for global healing response this year, I often think we need to remember that Mother Nature knows best ultimately, and is kind of, at least that's my belief, and is restoring balance where there has been human intervention over a timescale and in a way that Gaia, if I can call Mother Nature that, that's the term I use, knows best. This wonderfully powerful consciousness. And so there is a role for fire. There has to be a role for fire in clearing the way for new life to form, for new forests to take root or whatever. There is an important role for areas being burned. But what we might will for here is wisdom for those of us humans who are trying to work around this, to have a sense of where we might work around, work with nature, shall we say.
Right.
But there might be wisdom
with nature.
Exactly. It kind of an intuition for planners, developers, in where they're siting new urban settlements in sympathy with this, for example. Also, we might will for continued advances in early warning prediction and firefighting methods, which, as I understand it, firefighting methods have been fairly unchanged for many decades now. Actually, how you tackle these big fires has been kind of known what the strategies are. I remember the likes of, do you remember Red Adair? A long time ago, particularly well-known firefighter who used to be a real expert on this. But it's in how they use technology primarily, and AI and drones and so on, and potentially aircraft as well. Resilience and support for fire. This one really struck me when we were talking about the temperatures these fires reach to, the terrifying prospect of firefighters going in to any fire, but particularly these large-scale, often initially out of control fires with such intense heat, the smoke, the pollutants and everything. It takes incredible bravery. So really willing for those who are involved on the front line, and indeed our emergency workers as well, those who are rescuing those who are being evacuated.
I would be remiss in not mentioning that my son is a captain in the Phoenix Fire Department.
Ah, of course. Yes, indeed.
He is not a wildfire fighter, which he tells me is a completely different thing. They train differently. He is in the city. But still, in the heat of Arizona, he does deal with some difficult heat.
I can imagine.
And fires. Mm-hmm.
Among the bravest people, most of us will never forget the bravery of the firefighters and other emergency workers going up the stairs of the Twin Towers on 9/11. I mean, many of them, of course, sadly lost their lives. Extraordinary bravery. And going back, having rescued one person, going back again. Ah, my goodness. And for their families, of course, as well, holding their families.
Mm-hmm.
As we've said, and we keep repeating, and most of our listeners will know, the big issue here, or one of the big issues, is climate change. So praying for continued global pressure to reduce carbon emissions. This is another, if it hasn't been, should be wake-up call. We are all feeling the heat, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And a mindfulness among the public when discarding potentially flammable materials and in being vigilant to the possible signs of new fires. I suspect that some fires, as we said, some sadly are deliberate arson, or they're just down to people being very negligent in discarding campfire matches or whatever. But there will be those that are started by accident by people who normally are pretty vigilant, who, just on the odd occasion aren't that mindful. So just increase mindfulness when people are playing with fire, shall we say, or the risk of fire.
And given that it is estimated that 90% of all wildfires in some parts of the world result from human activity, we suggest holding as our special focus for intention this week. We will that all who have the means to influence, educate, and inform, and in all territories that are especially at risk of wildfires taking hold, will be moved to emphasize public education around safety for fire in the natural environment. So please join us in holding this intention, especially during this fire season.
Yes. Which seems, as we said, to be going on longer and not following, the traditional patterns that many of us grew up with for the seasons.
That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in Clive's daily Insight Timer offerings, and with me in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out, too, for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us and holding intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. And in the meantime,
thank you. Go well. Stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Vince and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.